Cooking for 100, ILI masterminds, and an operator's experience with EMAT. All of that in the book.
Secret handshakes.
And secret handshakes that we know exist within the industry. All of that and more on today's show. Plus a really good chance to hear how sometimes a good Q&A question that we get can appear on the show. So take a listen, submit your questions if you have them, and we hope you enjoy this episode. All right, welcome to today's edition of Pipeline Things. I am your host, Rhett Dotson, my co-host, Mr. Christopher De Leon. And as you can see, we are in yet another undisclosed location with a chair in the middle of us, which means that we have a fun guest to introduce to you guys today. Before we get started today, and it's going to tie into today's episode, Chris, at home, I have some fun I want to share with you. I don't know how you motivate your kids to help in the house, but you guys know out there that I have 4 kids. So we're a family of 6. It's busy. We started encouraging our kids to help cook, to teach them life skills. You know, you think cooking is secondhand or easy, right? Like,
it depends. I would say cooking for 100 people for me is easier than cooking for 2 people.
I was going to say cooking in general.
Okay.
When you think about the steps in cooking, like, there's a lot of stuff comes natural to us as adults. There's actually a really funny YouTube video out there where a guy asked his kids to create procedures to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and he just shreds their procedures, right? So it's like, put the peanut butter on the toast, and he's like putting it on the side, and then it's like, stack the pieces of bread together, and he flips them and does it backwards.
How'd the kids respond? Were they frustrated?
They kept trying to rewrite their procedures, and his point of his post on LinkedIn, it was really funny, was procedures are harder than you think.
That guy's about to get a whole lot of views now. Everybody's going to go look for it.
Yeah, if I can find that repost, I would. It was really funny. I actually really enjoyed watching it. But I saw this firsthand with my kids last night. So my daughter was making macaroni and cheese. Okay. And I'm thinking
like the little cup with water put in the microwave?
No. Like, she was making homemade macaroni and cheese. Like, you had to bake it in the oven.
Oh, you baked it.
Yeah, right.
Not the boil, not like the craft, like boil the water with the powder.
Yeah, and this was from a kid's cookbook. So the kid's cookbook had some, you would think, fairly easy steps to follow. And I'm constantly like, okay, Aubrey, what's the next step? Did you read the next step? Yeah. And it'd be like, mix these 3 ingredients together. And she's like, Dad, is this mixed? And mixed to her was like, just stir once. And I'm like, no, you actually have to mix it. She's like, well, do I mix it in this bowl? Do I mix it in a different bowl?
So do you think you being present complicated it more or less?
Oh, look, my presence made sure that we had something that was edible that came out at the end of the night, right? And then, it's really funny because my other kids, like Caleb finishes and he's like, dude, I finished cooking. I'm like Gordon Ramsay. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, are you serious? And Morgan and I look at each other and we're thinking, like, if we hadn't been here, like, everything in the oven would have been burned to a crisp.
I'm gonna be honest with you, that sounded like a great opportunity to have a camera, like the Big Brother type scenario, where you're just like watching the kid dynamics happen.
No, because it started rough. Because the first thing I did, I was like, Aubrey, it says find a large pot. She's like, what's a pot? I'm like, you know what a pot is. And she just wanted me to go get the pot. So we spent 5 minutes with me going back and forth with my daughter to say, go find a pot. I was like, look. Finally got to the point I said, just pick something out of that bottom there and show it to me, and I will tell you yes or no. And we can go guess or check until you find the large pot. That's awesome. But point is, procedures seem easy to some. You and I cook a good bit. And so we're familiar, man. We get in there. I can read a poorly written recipe or something on the back of a note card
and make it happen.
The best of it. For somebody who's never done it before, just reading, something as simple as cooking is
mac and
not.
Cheese.
Yes, and it was a multi-step mac and cheese is not that easy. Yeah. And that brings us to today's episode.
I will actually say this, right? So I mentioned the whole idea of, for me, cooking for 100 people is way easier than cooking for 2 people. That's my opinion. And the reason why I say it like that is because normally if it's cooking for 2, it's just me and Amanda. And I'm like, ooh, I want to make something really good.
You don't cook for the kids? You don't cook for 5?
It's an example, bro.
Oh, okay. I'm just checking.
Right?
I didn't know if you just like the
where if it's 100 people, it's probably one of my pool parties, and I'm either doing crawfish or I'm making fajitas, and that's just flip and go, right?
Still a lot of prep work.
Not really.
You know what? So I tell you what. Next time you get Gemma out there and tell her to flip the fajitas and see what she does.
She's done it.
Oh, well, maybe your kids are better than mine.
No, they're not. There's some exposure.
Well, maybe so. I'm just saying, I expose my kids. Caleb's about to get exposure on the grill. So the point is,
send him to Deal Chris. Maybe I should take care of that one.
I might have to, man. I just say I was shocked that, like, it seemed like a very simple step in the process.
Yeah.
and my kids will
Things
like get
got
hung up on. I'm like, wow,
complicated.
this
it just-
like
Yeah.
is a big advantage to having done something multiple times before in terms of how you approach it. So that brings us to today. We deal with a lot of operators
Yep.
across the spectrum when it comes to EMAT. And you've heard us say before that EMAT's not like a lot of other technologies. There's kind of a learning curve, if you will.
Yeah.
And you and I could talk about that, but to be honest, I don't think we're the best ones. I think it's good for the audience
And
to
why
hear
is
from
that?
You know,
Define it a little bit.
I think the reason we might not be the best ones is A, we came from a vendor who did a lot of that.
Yep.
And B, we're only one perspective. We've seen it from the vendor's perspective, right? We've actually not lived in the shoes. I have not lived in the shoes of an operator who had to ramp up from EMAT. And I think that perspective is very different.
Yeah, I would say, so obviously, I've had the privilege to see it from both sides. However, my experience as an operator was quite some time ago. And it wasn't the volume user, right? It was a scenario where we had to run it, right? We had an incident, and as a response to the incident, we had to run it. And the learning curve was quick. And I would say...
And that was early on, too.
And that was early on.
Yeah, I mean, EMAT's a different now even than it was
is.
when you ran it.
And what I would say is I think that it kind of ties to our little segue there a bit into... I think a lot of times we fall in the rut of, this is obvious. It's kind of like Aubrey trying to find the pot. It's like...
Get the big pot.
It's kind of routine now.
She's
It's
like,
like,
this?
yeah,
No,
this is what
that's
we
a
need to
frying
do.
pan, love.
So you could just move, right? Whereas I think it's fair to say, right, that we would say the vast majority of operators haven't run an EMAT before. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah. And if they do it for the first time and they don't get help, they might not even turn the oven on. So let's bring on our guest. So today's guest is Mr. Mike Preuit from Boardwalk. As he's coming on the show, I'll say, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Y'all are really scraping the bottom of the barrel of the talent pool.
We are not scraping the bottom of the barrel of the talent pool. We went for the best of the best.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
We went for the perfect audience.
Yes, we
Fantastic.
absolutely did. And I want to say a little bit before I ask Mike to introduce himself, which is, first off, huge thanks for joining us. I think you have, as we mentioned, a lot of perspective to offer to operators. That's why I'm excited about this episode, because you, I think, in your program and the way you manage things looks a lot like a lot of operators out there. And so there's good advice and that they can glean from you. In saying that, I also want to say that Mike is not representing Boardwalk in any way. It's our standard disclaimer. This is Mike at a bar, but it's not a bar because we're actually in his office.
Having a discussion. Telling us it's story time.
It's his story time, right?
Yeah.
And so as such, he's not giving you advice that he's liable or Boardwalk's liable for. He's just helping you guys out. So Mike, with that introduction and healthy disclaimer for all the attorneys, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What's your title?
Well, before we started that, I kind of wanted to let Christopher know how much anxiety I have about
Cooking?
about you cooking for 100 friends in your backyard.
Oh, yeah.
I would have anxiety to even have that many friends in my life.
I don't even have that many friends, period. That says something about me.
That's just crazy to you. I was sitting there thinking,
Yeah,
oh
so
man, that's insane.
I'll put it into perspective. So Leo, for his birthday, we were talking to him, and he was like, Dad, I'm two things. What's up, son? He's like, I want a piñata, and I want crawfish.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, all right, so 75 people, crawfish, how many pounds is that? So,
Wow.
5 pounds a person?
yeah, it gets fun real quick.
He might even say, "What's that hair too?" Right? I mean that CDL.
Leo's got
hair.
the CDO if you haven't seen him.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I'm Mike Preuit. I'm the ILI Technology and Analytics Manager at Boardwalk. I've been at Boardwalk since about 2007.
Okay.
So, I mean that's kind of me. I mean that's my role here. Do everything ILI and the analytics side, and we pick the digs and the technology and kind of go from there.
Great. So obviously the reason we brought you on is we're talking about EMAT today. How would you describe yourself as a user of EMAT? Where do you put yourself on the spectrum?
I would say that we're pretty new user, and what brought that on was really REN 2, being able to do a lot more EMAT
I want to make
runs.
sure REN 2, the portion that hasn't actually been officially adopted into
Correct.
code. So preemptively, you guys are engaging EMAT.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting into this more mode of mega rule and using EMAT, and I know it's been out there for a while, but we haven't been a huge user of it. It's been traditionally HydroTest for us, but now getting in. It's been around for a while, right? So I would say we're a new user. We ran a couple in the 2013 era. Did some investigations on that. Didn't really have any large indications to worry about. I mean, it was puddle welds and things like that. And so it wasn't really beneficial for that invested capital.
Sure.
So we just kind of moved on with our program, and it's really been a lot of MFL and all that up to this point. Until recently, last year, we ended up running about 10 of them, and there's about 10 on the schedule for this year as well. So really getting into the new technology, or I say new technology. I mean, it's been around.
It's a new technology for you guys.
No,
and I think that's fair to say, right? And
if a decade ago was the last time you engaged it, it's changed a lot in a decade.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. And we were looking at a usage chart from back then. It was very small, and that has just blossomed. So
and you know, Mike, I think what's pretty interesting is it's you guys. You know, you go from using one technology that you're really comfortable with, right? Let's just say MFL or Caliper, and then now you guys are ramping up to do EMAT. How do you feel about that? Is that something you're like, yeah, we're ready for this, or you're kind of anxious of it, like the whole 100-person cooking for 100 people
for 1,000? I mean, it's so different. I mean, we're really data driven at Boardwalk. We always have been. We really look at the amplitudes, and we've been doing that for 20 years. Even my predecessor who taught me. So we're very much in the data, always have been, and then looking at this data is completely different. It's just not the same. And then trying to figure out, you know, you got reflections, transmitters, receivers, what's coming back, why is it coming back, how much modes, is coming back,
all that fun stuff.
I mean, there's just so much to go through, and you almost have to sit with these analysts to get a good understanding of what you're looking at, because if you dig everything that they report, you're in a bind. You know, it's just a big problem.
So, you know, it's interesting because I like how you mentioned that talking to the analyst. That's been one of our fundamental talking points, is that you do need to sit down with the analyst in a way that if you have expertise in Caliper and MFL, you don't necessarily need to. I used to describe it as EMAT's kind of like there's 4 or 5 flags that you have to look at. And so you're looking at maybe a reflector flag, an echo flag, a transmission flag. And sometimes those flags don't always agree, but you put them together to try and actually determine whether or not you think that feature is reported, or I should say the analyst does. And it's not as simple. Like if you're just going off amplitudes, that's confusing to talk about. That's the biggest red blob. But the biggest red blob may not actually be the feature that you're interested in. So have y'all had a lot of, what have your experiences been talking to the analyst? Is that something you'd pretty strongly recommend to somebody coming on board?
Absolutely. I mean, if you don't understand what's being reported, you're really missing the mark here. And so talking to the analyst, you get a better feel for what they see, why they see it. You know, if you ran other technology with it, if you ran your MFL and you're used to running MFL or a CMFL, and how those signals actually, what do? Do they cancel them out? Do they add to the call? You know, how does that all play in it? So having an understanding of what the analysis analysis team is doing is very important from my perspective.
So help me understand, when does that happen in the process for you guys? Was this something you did from run 1? Or did run 1, you're like, you know what, we got this on our own, we're going to handle this? Was that a learning curve for you?
So what I'll say about run 1, the 2013, let's
pick up in the 20s.
Just say, so last year we knew it was going to be a big, I don't want to say problem, newness. You know,
challenges.
So from the very beginning, we were talking to the analyst team, our project managers with the vendor, and even consulting a bit with other people in the industry, our peers, other consultants, just to kind of get an understanding of what are we in for.
Getting help.
And I'm about to say, they did a good job of get help.
Yeah, you reached out and got help.
Get help. And we're still at a part to where we have to get help. I mean, there's so many things that you just have to deal with that if you don't have help, you're just going to be on an island. And either you're just going to take what the report is and dig up your entire pipeline, which isn't fair to the operator to do that.
It's not a good use of your resources if you think about it.
It's really not. You have to really put your money where the most risk is, and digging up a puddle weld or something that has a reflection that doesn't matter, or this below specification that's reported. You know, you just have to take all of the considerations in. and you have to have the people on your team to help you understand what those considerations should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway that I got from you, right? Is it's one of the earlier comments you made was it's if you're not careful, you're just going to dig up every feature, and you kind of drew a conclusion there and said that's not a great decision.
Right. But you do have to get your feet wet, and you're going to do a lot of digging up front.
Yeah.
And so you have to prepare yourself for that, prepare management for that.
Yeah.
And just know that you're going to have a lot of digs in your bucket in order to feel better about not digging something later.
And the other thing that I thought was pretty interesting is it's in Mike, we appreciate what you said is that your team is focused on looking at some of the amplitudes. In that case, let's broadly categorize that as sort of like caliper tools and magnetic base tools like MFLA, MFLC, etc. EMAT's not like that. Right, and so that kind of sounds like it puts you in a little bit of a different situation to where you're pretty comfortable doing something back to cooking for 100 people, and we know how to do this, and we know how to choose what we're going to dig and not dig. And now with EMAT, it's just different, right? There's not simple amplitudes that you can look at and say, that makes sense. So if an operator is expecting to do that, then you said they really need to engage the analyst and invest time in that. Any couple lessons learned in that process of engaging the analyst? So, hey, I'm comfortable with MFL, A or C or S, but when you look at EMAT, you're talking to analysts. This is maybe some things you should think about, or appreciate you're going to be a bit vulnerable with, right? You want to lean on your experience, but maybe you can't.
Right, and everybody wants to feel like they have the right answers. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big enough person to know that I don't have all the right answers right now related to EMAT, and so that's why we lean on that analyst. And it's a learning process for me and my team. I have a team of 2 people, very good analysts that are looking through MFL and CMFL and now EMAT, and it's a challenge, right? It was also even a challenge to get the software loaded on our computers. And now we're still in a process of looking at what the data is, what the signal is, and how to really put that in a library of what we're digging up and learning. And then kicking that information back to the analyst and saying, hey, this is kind of what it was, didn't really match up to, maybe a linear A indication or whatever that indication might have been. So help us understand what you were looking at to call it this. Yeah. So that's still our process currently.
So one of the things that stuck with me from that, and I really just like it, was the get help aspect. Because not only did you lean, and not consultants, I like how you leaned on other people within the industry. So as you go from being new user to mature, are you going to share that knowledge with other people? Can people call Mike Preuit to get help?
Way to put him on the spot.
I know.
Good grace.
So
we can take a break too if you're not ready to answer.
We've had, absolutely. Because honestly, quarterly, I have an ILI mastermind call. Yeah. And it's just some operators that get on there. And we kick ideas around and talk about, problems in the industry. And I have been recently talking about EMAT. Yeah. I've got some other really well-versed individuals that share their information, and I share information about topics they may want. So it's been very interesting, and leaning on your peers and sharing that information is very important. Very important.
So cool.
There's some companies out there that have spent millions of dollars building their procedures and what they're doing. And so I lean on that. And I expect people to lean on me for that information too. It's very helpful to the industry.
Well, there you go. If you need to run EMAT, you can call Mike Preuit and get help directly from him. But actually, we're going to pick up on the way back. I want to come back and start talking about feature lists and excavations. But we're going to take a break. We'll hear from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
So about that ILI mastermind.
Hi, I'm Kara Turner. I am the Managing Director and co-founder of ADV Marketing. We get the honor of working with Rhett and Christopher to produce this crazy podcast and also work with them on any other initiatives that they have when it comes to marketing. And if you know them or are listening to this podcast, you know that it gets pretty crazy around here. So we have a lot of fun with them. ADV Marketing is a full-service business-to-business marketing agency. We specialize in service companies and technology companies. So if you are enjoying listening to this podcast and the fun that they're having, reach out to us and see how we can make your marketing fun.
Welcome back. We are here with a member of the ILI Masterminds talking about EMAT with Mike Preuit. And so
is this a secret society? How do you have to get jumped in? We're kind of towards
handshake.
No handshakes.
Show us the handshake.
No handshake. I'm sorry.
Can you name names?
No, it's pretty secret, pretty high tech secret stuff.
So I just saw Wakanda Forever, dude. They're legit. They have like the whole thing, and then they do this kind of stuff. Like that would be so cool if you have a handshake.
They do. He's just not allowed to disclose it.
After
next time at
after the
PPIM,
episode,
we're going to trail him at PPIM.
Just watch.
Be like, "What's he doing?" There it is. I think I saw the handshake. So, Mike, you did a really great job setting up how your experiences were different with EMAT in the first half of our podcast. Loved it. I want to get into receiving the report now and in the ditch. So, from you guys' perspective, when you got your first list of features, what did you guys do? What would you recommend to an operator when they get the first list of features? What did y'all struggle with? What do you have?
Don't freak out.
Don't freak out.
Don't freak out. So you're going to get a lot of information on there, and you're really going to be overwhelmed. And so that was one of my big things about making sure that you're prepped for this. Some of the things that we struggled with was, what to have on that report. I mean, as an operator, you have the ability to say what you want on that report. So you may want to not have FPRs or burst calculations done as of yet, because what you really need to do is have pipe properties. What we've learned is that if you have pipe properties, then you can actually rely on some of the burst pressures that you're getting. Now, if you don't have that, and you have to use defaults, that has a little bit of adverse reaction or adverse, burst pressure. So, that was one of the things that we learned early on. We did do a lot of digging, and I think maybe on the first couple we might have dug everything just to get the confidence of what is what.
Get some experience, right? Get some experience under your belt. Yeah.
Because anytime you get, let's just say you get a linear indication, the industry knows that as a crack-like indication, as to what it kind of relates to. So anytime that somebody's getting a report back and you're pretty new at it and you're saying,
you're thinking high risk, right?
It's like you're anxious. You're about to have a big problem. But that's not really the case.
Yeah.
But as a new user, you're like, I have to make sure I'm on a thin line here.
I want to bring this back into cooking for 100 people, right? So you're not sure if the fire's right. You get that first slab of fajitas on there. You turn, you're like, is it overcooked? Is it undercooked? And then once people start eating, you're like, oh my God, they're still eating. And so your anxiety comes down and you're just turning and burning. I can imagine it's the same, right? As you're getting the report and you're doing more digs, your anxiety kind of maybe you get more comfortable with it and you're like, you know what? This has this burst pressure, but I'm pretty sure I understand what the results are going to be.
Exactly. I mean, all we are in integrity, we're trying to do the right thing, regardless of what that is. I don't care if we have to go dig up the world if it's a concern.
Yeah.
But we just have to be mindful of what's not a concern.
Yeah.
So, the detection limitations, the specifications, these calculations that you're doing.
So that's a lot of front end work. You're
really
hitting again on things that Chris and I often harp on, and I'm glad you're bringing out, which is if you're running EMAT to kick the tires, and you're not prepared to talk about whether or not you're getting a prelim report, what's in that prelim report, what it looks like, what your reporting specification is, do you have material properties, you can't just wait and get a final report.
Yeah.
The other thing I think it's really important that you brought out is when you get that final report, you even mentioned over excavating, and I thought, when's the last time you over excavated for an MFL?
It's been a while.
Right? So it's really different. So I'm curious, there's probably a lot of conversations that have to take place to explain to other stakeholders, hey, this is why we're digging. Hey, this is what we're doing, right? I mean, it's not like any other technology. And I think especially as you become accustomed to it.
It really brings to light the whole concept of change management, right? Management of change. Like, yes, you're pegging and you're digging and you're keeping the pipe round sounding in the ground. But there is change, right? And you guys have to cover those bases. I wanted to highlight something you said that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to bring that to the forefront. You said being specific about what's being reported in each report, and I think that's a really good point, right? So you also brought in Mega Rule or RIN 2, so we see that API 1163 is now incorporated by reference in code, so that's code now. And just as a pointer, it's, you said we're used to in MFL reports, for example, having burst pressure calculations, but in EMAT you might not want to do that, right? Because one, you're probably still qualifying the ILI indications. Is this something that's truly of concern that I need a burst pressure for, right? Or is this something like mill manufacturing, as an example? And on the other one is it's what report does that come in, right? You might want burst pressures, but that might not come until a later report, right? That doesn't necessarily have to be on the front end. So I think that's definitely something people can appreciate as they get more involved in the EMAT program themselves.
So now I want to pick up in the ditch, right? So you're going in the ditch. I want to ask, how prepared did you feel for that? Or what challenges or maybe advice have you encountered as you went in the ditch prepared to see one thing? Is that what you found in the ditch? How did you go through the process of reconciling that?
So in the ditch was, it's a whole new can of worms too. You're not going in there with a pit gauge and just a UT looking for corrosion or your caliper measuring a dent. Now you're looking for stuff that is very hidden. So, whatever your procedure is, certainly most of the time we excavate, we're going to be doing magging and things of that nature. But now you're actually looking for potential small cracking, if that's been whatever this linear indication could be, and it's some type of reflection that the tool's seeing. So you have to find out what that reflection is. So really talking to my industry peers about the best people to go out in that ditch and do that analysis for us. And that's where your peer group comes back into play. About maybe you couldn't find anything and you talk to another operator and saying, hey, who are you using to be able to find out what the best process was to actually find this indication? And did you feel confident? Did you need to send it to the lab? And we actually did some lab work as well.
So you did destructive evaluations
we did.
as well?
We did. We did some burst testing on about 4 different.
So not even just metallurgical. You actually pulled them out of the ground and burst tested them, full-scale testing.
Right. We did full-scale testing on 4 indications, and then we probably fractured 15 or 20 of them.
Do you mind, I'd like to ask you, how did that information help you? So how did the information that you got from destructive evaluations metallurgically and the full-scale testing, what did that do for you on the back end?
So the biggest takeaway from the burst testing was that the burst pressure in no way, form, or fashion matched the calculated burst pressures that we expected.
Much lower, much higher?
Yeah. They were much, much higher. The burst pressures that we're getting, I don't want to say across the entire spectrum, but so far across the spectrum are ultra conservative, which actually makes us feel a lot better about what we're potentially leaving in the line, what we're digging, and things of that nature. So we're constantly building our knowledge base, and that was probably the best information that we have to make us feel good in my small team.
Because then you can sleep at night.
Yes, absolutely, and that's
kind of like
what
I dug the worst ones. We bursted them. Lots of conservatism. We can rest.
So for an up and coming new user, you did a lot of things that are pretty impressive. I have to say, because you took the step of running EMAT. You said you overdug. All of these things have costs associated with them. You cut them out of the ground. You did destructive evaluations. Then you even burst tested some. That's, I would say, a comprehensive program that's going to give you, I'd really say kudos to you and Boardwalk.
Your experience goes up, your maturity and understanding the evaluation comes up, and I bet it gives you confidence in running 10 of these, estimated, right?
It does. And it is a great kudos to our management to believe in the technology and to believe in us as a department to actually gain that knowledge
and use those resources. That's an investment.
Yes.
You said earlier, maybe the capital investment wasn't commensurate to the value you received. How do you feel about now?
It was. It's great. There's nothing more to be said about it. You have to do the things that we're doing to feel confident about it.
So let's qualify that a little bit, right? So if someone says we're going to run an EMAT. We don't have, I don't even say TVC records, but we haven't done any fracture toughness testing on the pipe we're inspecting, and they haven't talked to their peers. Would you say it's wise for them to run an EMAT at that point, or should they probably wait a little bit?
I think it depends on the application, right?
Yeah.
If you typically hydro it and you're in the mountains somewhere and you have problematic and you're doing sections and this, that, and the other, what I would recommend to a new operator, generally we have to dig up the pipe every now and again and do something. So you need to start building a library and pull in samples of your pipe. And do these the lab testing on it, so you have that information if you ever plan on doing some EMAT runs. So that's the prep work in EMAT is just totally different than MFL. MFL's been around since the 60s. We got that. We have it going on MFL. EMAT, I mean, what we started running 2000, early 2000s or so. So
Early
it's
commercial
still
runs were,
relatively new, I guess.
Yeah.
So I have two questions.
It's mature, but when we say new, we mean its use across the spectrum of all operators. Right.
I mean, if I had a pipeline that was put in 2000, that's new.
Yeah.
You know. So
I have two questions for you. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you're reconciling it. So if you dug an MFL feature, corrosion feature, and you burst tested it, and you got a rupture strength that was 50% higher than you predicted, you'd be like, what is going on? Mm-hmm. But it sounds like I just threw 50% out there. You didn't. That was on me. I'm assuming you're getting stuff that's really high when you're doing the burst test. How did you reconcile that for the EMAT tool?
Well,
and what types of conversations do you have after? Because you get pushed back like, well, why are we digging anything? Or how do you close the loop on that?
Well,
because it's a big gap.
It is a big gap, and it's more testing, and it's still up for discussion. Mm-hmm. You know, even at PPIM, I was in some papers where we were talking about, you know, MAT8 or any other, you know, failure modes that or calculators that we're using out there, and the difference between doing those calculations on an actual known crack versus a called EMAT, which is likely going, I'm careful with my words here, likely going to be conservative. I mean, the tolerance is a little bit wider on EMAT, right? And it tends to seem like most of the time it's on the conservative side, but we have seen some on the other side as well. You know, with all of that, I don't know the answer. I don't know because, you know, we have to get better. We have to get better at the calls to put in the calculators to get more accurate burst pressures, and that's just the gap. I think that's the gap.
It's also the pipeline, though, right? I mean, had this been a pipeline that you have integrity issues with related to cracking, I bet that would also change the perspective of how conservative was conservative based on the burst pressures, right? Because it could have gone the other way.
Correct.
Right? You could have had high burst pressures, but your guys in the ditch are like, you know, they're doing either, you know, buffing out cracks, and you're getting below, you know, deeper than 50%, and you're like, man, this stuff is bursting high, but I don't know, you know, I've got 300 of these calls. I don't know how comfortable I feel about leaving any of this stuff in the ground, right? So it's probably pretty easy to go the other way too, I bet.
It is, and you really put the call in perspective also. I mean, are you looking at a seam call or a pipe body call? Pipe body calls, you put a little bit more, I don't know, I don't want to say weight, but you know, they're sitting out there all by themselves, an indication, whereas a seam is already kind of messy and loud and got a lot going on, and depending on your seam type, I mean, if you have like an A.O. Smith pipe with that big seam on the outside, you're going to get some lack of fusion, which is kind of a known thing. So it's really dependent on your pipeline of in your situation.
So, Mike, you've been a great guest. I have one more question for you. Two more, actually. We're going to close the show out with. Are you? Would you consider yourself an avid listener of the podcast? I'm about to test you if you.
Well, you can't test me. You know, I would not.
The
test
customer's
me,
always right. Say the customer's always right, Rhett.
To be honest, I went on the site today, and I was like, oh man, how long are these shows? And so I started looking through at how long all of them
Which
are.
Which one did you click?
Which
one did you click?
Well, I didn't click on any of them, but they all say the length and the minutes, and they were ranging from 31 minutes to 46 minutes. I was like, all right, where are we going to be here? So
you're doing well, is what I'll say. Well, here's the question I had. We got asked in our last Q&A episode, if an operator goes into the ditch and finds nothing, is that good? And the question was asked specific to EMAT. So now I'm going to ask it to you. We answered it, which means now people are going to go listen to our answer and then come back.
No, because they'd have to find it.
Oh, that's true.
You
and
said
then now you have to listen to episodes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, Mike, if you get a call from EMAT and you go into the ditch and you find nothing, is that good?
Well, I mean, it's a yes and no question.
Okay, come on, give me the yes and the no.
I mean, yes, you don't have an integrity threat right there. So but no, the tool saw something. There's something there. Something caused a reflection. Something's going on. And, you know, it's interestingly enough, we may or may not have that happen to us. And as a last-ditch effort, send X-ray out there. Send X-ray out there, and they're like, well, you know, probably not going to see anything because PAUT didn't see anything, you know, MAG didn't see anything, this, that, and the other. Well, let's send X-ray because I want to find something.
You guys really ran this into the ground.
If I dug something up, and there's some type of, and because we're data driven, we see the signal, we know there's something.
The ditch
there.
is open. I've already spent the money.
There.
Give me the time. Find it.
So last ditch effort. Let's send a X-ray out there.
Interesting.
So and there was 3 very light shadows in there. So there's some type of mid-wall manufacturing type inclusion or whatever that may have been.
Yeah.
But so to answer your question, we want to find out what was called and why, and get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
But I'm very happy that there was no integrity threat there.
Yeah.
I think you actually did a better job answering that question. I think I was the one that fielded that question on the Q&A episode. I think Mike did a better job.
The customer's always right.
Customer's always right. So, Mike, I want to say thanks for joining us today. To our operators out there and our listeners of the show, hopefully I got a lot. Mike has done a really good job hammering home points that we've made. I think overarching is get help if you're going to be a new user. There's people like the masterminds, of which Mike is now.
And if you get in, you better let us, since you learned about it on the show.
Give us the handshake, please.
You have to come on the show, teach us the handshake.
Then it's public.
So that
yeah.
Hey,
but no, really get help and recognize that EMAT and MFL are different and be prepared to run it. Mike, I think you did a good job hammering those points home. I want to say thank you for joining us and living up to the hype of the show. You did a great job. On that note, to our audience, we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Pipeline Things. And if you want to hear operators like Mike or myself answer your questions, you never ever know when they'll get used. So submit your questions from all this episode or any of our episodes as we gear up to do another Q&A. Thanks, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.